Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. And today we sit down with Jess Braverman, the legal director at Gender Justice, a St. Paul-based nonprofit legal and policy advocacy organization that is devoted to addressing the causes and consequences of gender inequality both locally here in Minnesota and nationally. We talked to Jess about what her organization does, what brought her to the advocacy law she has practiced, and how her Judaism impacts her work on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Jess Braverman, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So you are the legal director here at Gender Justice. We're in your office here in St. Paul. Tell us a little bit about what you do and what Gender Justice as an organization does.
Sure. So I'm the legal director, so I do the lawyering, the litigating. Gender Justice is a nonprofit. We do legal and advocacy, so we advance gender equity through the law. So in other words, we sue people. So we bring lawsuits where the basis has to do with some sort of gender discrimination or has that kind of angle. So we'll sue school districts who don't let trans students use the right bathrooms or locker rooms. We'll sue employers who don't let their employees pump or nurse with enough time. So we bring all kinds of lawsuits, and we try to shape the law in a way that makes life more livable for people. So has your job changed a lot? It feels like we're in a very different sort of time, in a better time, frankly, in terms of the idea of gender equality and inclusion in that way. How has the organization evolved with that? So I was a public defender for 10 years, and then I started 4 months ago.
Okay.
But I do have some background on the organization, and I think they were actually kind of what they did was kind of unique because they're not an LGBT legal nonprofit, which a lot of groups are. Mm-hmm. What they do is if they're representing, let's say, women, they represent all women. That includes cis women, that includes trans women. Okay. So there are organizations out there. They're called TERFs, though they don't like that title. And what they do is they basically say, trans women aren't real, just awful things. Trans women aren't real women. They're holding down women, and by that they mean cis women, but they don't specify it that way. What I love about this organization is it groups everyone together. We advance gender equity, cis, trans, however you identify. If there's a gender angle to your issue, we'd like to help. We'd like to step in.
What led you to make the transition from the public sector, public defender world, trial world to this? This seems like a very different type of law and advocacy type of work.
Yeah, so I went into law school thinking this is what I would do, and then the recession hit, and there were literally no jobs, and I kind of stumbled into defending young people in family court. So if there was an abuse or neglect case, or if they were charged with delinquency, meaning like when a kid commits a crime, or if they were an adult, it would be considered a crime, they also get defense. So I represented kids, and then that was in Brooklyn, New York. And then I moved here, and I started representing adults in felony cases. And then Gender Justice reached out to me. They were looking for a legal director, and I thought, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted to do. My internships were either trans or LGBT related. They had more to do with what I do here. So I loved being a public defender, but I am so excited to make that switch. It feels like a career change, though. I'm
sure, and only, 10 or 11 years later than you had anticipated it being.
Yeah, it was a belated.
So what was it that brought you to the Twin Cities then? You said you started your career in Brooklyn. What brought you here?
My wife tricked me. So she brought me here in the summer and said, "Oh, look at the bike trails and the kayaking and so we visited enough times and we're like, "Oh, we could afford a house here," because in New York it's like a studio apartment is maybe $500,000. So we thought, and we were like, "Oh, you pay what for a house here?" Which I know here it sounds like a lot. Where we were, it sounds like you can't get anything for these prices. So
right.
We thought we loved the Twin Cities. I started to really like it. Then we moved here, and then winter hit. And I'm not full of regrets, but I'm grumpy like 8 months of the year, I'd say.
Well, with global warming, you'll be grumpier less time then, maybe.
Yeah, there could be some.
There's the bright side to global warming.
Yeah, the silver lining.
Or something like that.
For sure.
So how does your job here at Gender Justice, does it connect with your Judaism and how you choose to practice? How do you sort of do you reconcile the two in some way?
Yeah, so I have a complicated relationship with Judaism. I did grow up going to an Orthodox Jewish school that was very conservative and very very religious. It was not Reformed. It wasn't liberal. And my family is all from the USSR. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and my family fled religious persecution. And they came here, and they're all pretty conservative. I think they're, from their experience with communism, they kind of are very wary of anything that to them smells like it could be associated with that, which it's understandable. So they kind of went in an opposite direction. But I kind of see it as, they're in some ways, they're in many ways refugees. They came over here for a better life, and I like to think that everyone deserves that opportunity. Whether you're an immigrant, whether you're trans, whether you're gay, whatever it may be. For me, being a Jew is about kind of trying to find where you're accepted to be who you are, and that's not how I felt my education was in yeshiva, but that was my takeaway from just my family's life experience. And then I found that a lot of people agree with that is actually the Jewish value. It's just maybe not the people I necessarily grew up with. So I think a lot comes from the fact that my family is Jewish, and what their experience of that was like kind of drives my interest in social justice and civil rights.
Okay. And, in terms of the civil justice and civil rights in the Twin Cities, there are a lot of organizations, obviously besides yours, but there's obviously, a couple of notable Jewish organizations that are doing that kind of work. Have you connected at all with some of those?
Well, here at Gender Justice, we partner with the National Council of Jewish Women. Okay. I know we also do work with JCA, the Jewish Community Action, around our abortion lawsuit and around religious refusal issues where basically people deny other people their rights on supposedly religious grounds. So we definitely work together with Jewish groups who I see as more social justice focused and a little bit more in line with my vision of, kind of what Judaism teaches us. So in that sense, I have been involved. Everyone keeps telling me go to Shir Tikva. I haven't been there yet. I do, like, my relationship with Judaism really is complicated, and it was difficult to kind of grow up gay in that environment.
Sure.
We had like the mechitza with men and women separate.
Sure.
It was very, so having that background and then trying to kind of get back into practice and stuff is a little difficult for me. So I haven't done it, but enough cool people have said check out Shir Tikva that I'm like, oh, maybe I should.
So given your background and how you grew up versus sort of how you maybe would like to be as, in terms of Judaically growing up, how do you sort of bridge that, your past with what you want to see in your future?
I try to think about like the positive takeaways. I try to focus on like the things that are kind of going well for my family and how the Judaism is like culturally it's something that connects them to a larger picture. And so like it makes them, we're not kind of isolated as a family. It's like we're part of something bigger, like a Jewish community in New York. I think like that sense of community is really important, and I do want to have that, whether it has to be around a religious ideal or, focused on Judaism, I don't know, but I do think there's like aspects of growing up in a religion, like having a shul where, every week you see the same people, and then if someone dies, everyone goes to like, you have like wine after and you light a candle and everyone's kind of grieving together. Like that kind of stuff is, I just try to take away those things from it that I think are really helpful and really good, which is, it's a lot. Like, it's just you kind of take what I left behind is kind of the teachings that I saw as a little more kind of hateful and exclusive and that sort of thing.
And I think given the work you do and the person you are, that's, it's all, you're looking for something that's inclusive, that brings community together and not splits it apart.
Absolutely. And that makes people feel like they belong,
Sure.
They don't have to constantly be justifying their existence. Like the laws protect them. If someone discriminates against them, everyone comes together and says, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And it's a given, right? You don't have to fight for it every day. That's what I'm hoping for. So, and I think that's what Jewish people want, right? Like, we're looking for a homeland. We're looking for a place where we could just be ourselves without being persecuted. I think that's what everyone wants. So, yeah.
Fortunately, it seems, the times have changed, but the stories sort of the same in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is sort of a bummer, right? You feel like we'd move on from that at this point, right?
Yeah, you would
hope.
You would think, but everyone has a different metaphor about history. It's an arc or a pendulum or a hope. I'm sure we're all hopeful that this is kind of a blip. We'll look back at this time and be like, that was a strange 4 years. Hopefully.
In terms of the work that you're doing, what are things that people should be wary of that's sort of out there on the horizon that gender justice is working towards?
I think what I think people should really be wary of is the rhetoric that certain groups are using to justify taking away the rights of others, and that's what I think people need to really be wary of. There are groups, particularly the Alliance Defending Freedom and others, who kind of go around the country bringing lawsuits on the basis of free speech and religious rights, and they say, "How could you make me have to sell a product to a gay person when I believe in Jesus and my love of Jesus is And what they do is they frame everything as I don't hate gay people. I don't hate trans people. I just don't believe in gay marriage. So how can I make this, this loving card or this floral arrangement or whatever, and it sounds at first blush almost reasonable because you're like, yeah, why? I guess, it's not hateful. Why should you have to do this? But really, if you stop and think about it, you've incorporated as a business in a state and you have to follow rules. Right. And some of those rules are that if you sell a product, you can't put up a sign saying, we'll sell you a product unless you're gay or Jewish or whatever, because there's not going to be a law that says you can discriminate. You can avoid discrimination laws, but only for gay people, right? So It's once you start going down that road, it's anybody, right? Like, I don't want to sell I'm the only grocery store in town, but I don't really want to sell matzah on Passover. Why should I do, and
right.
You can kind of go in crazy directions with it. And so I think that's what people need to really be wary of. And sadly, when I look back at some of the case law, one of the weirdest cases that promotes this kind of intolerance came from, unfortunately, a Jewish community center. And it was really sad for me to see that case. Oh. I hope that we're kind of wary of that. We stop and interrogate it, and that we don't perpetuate it. And, I hope going forward we don't see any Jewish businesses trying to do that sort of thing. I would hope that by now, given all that's happened to us, that we know better.
One would hope, certainly.
Yeah.
Are there ways that people can volunteer or get involved in the organization? How can people, if this is the kind of thing that strikes them, what can they do?
Yeah, so if you like the fact that we like to sue people, you can always donate. We could always use the extra funds. Litigation is costly. There are a lot of upfront costs, and at the end of the day, you might be able to get some of that back. You don't always get all of it back, but it is just a direct. Everyone's in Minnesota, at least not so much in New York. In Minnesota, I think people can be a little shy about talking about money, but it is actually, donations are actually super helpful to keep us going. And there's other amazing organizations around the cities, too, that you can also donate to. We do have currently our Unrestrict campaign, so that's trying to get rid of a lot of the abortion restrictions in Minnesota. We go around doing education, messaging, that kind of stuff. You could always host a house party where people can come and talk to you about that campaign, about the abortion restrictions. So hosting a house party for Unrestrict is a great way to help. There's all kinds of creative ways. So you can go on our website, reach out to us, let us know that you want to somehow be a part of Gender Justice or Unrestrict or both, and we'd be happy to figure out a way for you to help.
And I know that's one area you mentioned earlier, NCJW, Minnesota. That's an area that they're heavily involved in right now with the Unrestrict campaign.
Absolutely.
As well.
They're fantastic partners on the Unrestrict campaign.
All right, last couple questions I have for you that we always end these interviews with.
Okay.
Favorite Jewish food?
Oh my gosh. Don't make me do this.
I have to.
Okay, chocolate babka.
Oh, okay. See, you answered that way too quick for somebody who didn't want to answer.
Yeah, I know, but it's like I default to chocolate. So if I'm in a pinch, it's going to be chocolate.
Something. Okay.
But chocolate babka, my family owned a kosher bakery growing up. My cousins, my aunts and uncles, in Long Island, New York, and their chocolate babka was just amazing, and I found pretty good. Oddly, it was vegan. I don't know why, but it did not detract from it. Breadsmith, just a fantastic chocolate
locally,
babka.
yeah.
Local, yeah, not far from here.
My kids love it.
So good.
Yeah, it's great. And favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, they're all pretty great.
As we are right in the middle of the high holiday season here.
Yeah, definitely not Yom Kippur. Although, what we did on Yom Kippur was we would go down to the Bronx River by the Bronx Zoo, and we'd throw bread in the river there,
Sure.
and that was actually really nice.
Yeah.
So it is, that there are
There's
nice
some good memories of
there's good Yom Kippur memories. Being hungry, but
Yes.
I would probably say Hanukkah. I know it's not a high, but like 8 days, you can't beat that.
Fried food.
Donuts.
Latkes.
Dreidel. You
Can't beat it.
No, and the goys love it.
Yeah.
So you can bring a lot of people
That's
in.
right.
Yeah.
It's a fun gathering holiday.
It is. Yeah.
Well, Jess Braverman, thank you so much for joining us this week. And before we go, a special shout out to our mutual friend, Christy Wesson, the communications director at NCJW, who suggested that we sit down and have you on the podcast. So thank you to Christy, and Jess, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Jess for joining us. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. If you know someone who'd be a good guest on the show, please email me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. And if you haven't yet, check out the newest Jewfolk podcasts. The Jews Are Tired, a weekly news digest from around the world, and We Won, Let's Eat, a deep dive into Jewish foods. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back October 28th once the high holidays are done. Shana Tova.